Hi, my name is Lara Groves. I'm an AI Accountability Practices researcher at the Ada Lovelace Institute, the London and Brussels-based research institute with a mission to make data and AI work for people and society. I'm here to present our paper, Going Public, Exploring the Role of Public Participation Approaches in Commercial AI Labs, a write-up of a research project I led in 2022 with support from my co-authors, Aidan, Peppin, Andrew Strait, and Jenny Brennan. So to set the scene around public participation in the AI industry, there's been considerable excitement generated from the potential of participatory AI from industry and beyond, and existing scholarship from the FACT community, including Bahani et al. 2022 and Sloan et al. 2021, has been pivotal in mapping the different modes and goals of participation in AI, helping us to make sense of the multiple underlying and often conflicting motivations for embedding participation in the AI industry. But there's still very little evidence on how commercial AI labs understand participation and what they think it's for, and even less on particular trials or experimentations with participatory approaches, particularly in the general purpose and generative AI context. The recent surge in the use of language of participation in the tech industry discourse, for example, democratizing AI, red teaming, public access, may not be matching the reality of practices in these companies. And so before prescribing more or better participation, we argue in the paper there's a need to understand the current state of play. Which brings us to our research. Our paper explores this empirical gap, and we had 3 research questions on how do commercial labs understand participation in development of products and research, what approaches do they actually adopt, and what obstacles do they face when doing so. And we conducted this inquiry across 2 research verticals, a literature review and semi-structured interviews. I reviewed theories of participation from deliberative democracy and sociology scholarship, literature on participatory design, and literature on participation in AI development, including specific studies and projects emanating from within AI labs. I led 12 interviews in autumn 2022 with a mix of practitioners and experts. I spoke to 9 industry practitioners with interest in or actively working on participatory AI, and 3 with participation experts with knowledge of and or experience working in the tech industry. And then I'll walk you through some of the findings of our paper. So the first is that there's no obvious convergence around a particular set of participatory approaches or methods in these labs. I think what really emerges from this research is that participatory AI is at present something of an empty signifier. When we probe around the kinds of approaches or methods that might comprise participation, we find a really mixed picture. And we've reproduced table 2 from our paper, which maps the real range of approaches cited as potentially participatory from our interviewees. The most common method to emerge in interview was this kind of basic consultation with external experts, often sought by companies with groups to which they have existing ties. Laypersons or members of the public are not always included in these projects, and when they are, there's no guarantee that their participation is going to be respected, valued, and supported. A notable example that we share in the paper is of a practitioner who conducts a participatory project who essentially gets told to go back and get a different answer from participants. Ultimately, even if we account for reticence to share identifiable details of certain projects, we can conclude from this study that not much public participation is taking place at all in AI labs. We notably find a disconnect between the grand, often normative ambitions for participation and what's actually achievable on the ground. Which brings us to our next finding, which is that implementing participatory approaches faces considerable challenges. And while it's true that these challenges are not unique to industry contexts, some of them do take on a particular magnitude in the commercial sector. The first is around resource intensity. So participatory work necessarily takes dedicated team members, often quite large timeframes and even larger budgets, even for a fairly narrowly scoped exercise. And so to quote one of our participants, it's just not low-hanging fruit for most companies who are beholden to their shareholders who would not argue if no participatory work was undertaken. There are also acute problems of misaligned incentives and atomization. We spoke to many passionate advocates for participation within firms, but often they were acting very much on their own stead, shouldering considerable risk and disconnected from other potentially motivated teams and individuals. They also felt unaligned with organization business model and also the agile development cycles of AI labs. We also didn't find much evidence of leadership in this area at the executive level. Additional concerns were also raised around practitioner positionality as workers in large corporations, and concern around not wanting to extract from or exploit participants who might belong to historically marginalized or disadvantaged communities. There's also the finding around participation being really challenging to conduct in contexts which lack a clear use case, and this finding speaks directly to current calls for public input in generative AI or general purpose AI. There's all these interesting questions around how you get members of the public to deliberate on a model such as GPT-4 with innumerate downstream uses and potential impacts. How would participants' contributions be effectively wrapped into ongoing development and iteration? And there's this challenge of scale and for diffuse AI value chains around who is responsible for and accountable for taking the findings of participatory projects forward. Our paper contributes important empirical evidence from commercial labs to the debate around participatory AI, but recognizing some of the limitations of our work, namely the small sample size and challenges using interviews to surface granular details of potentially commercially sensitive projects, there's a real need for further research at this intersection. And as participatory AI continues to capture broader interest, we argue that we need a sober and clear-eyed assessment of the merits and limitations of participatory approaches that are grounded in evidence. There are a few areas ripe for further inquiry, and I would love to hear thoughts on these from across the community at conference. So firstly, what should further experimentation with these approaches in industry look like? Second, there's a question around building internal and external incentive structures to encourage this experimentation. What are the tactics that we can leverage? And last, how can we challenge potentially damaging narratives around participation? For example, that participation is incompatible with innovation. That's all from me. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you enjoy the rest of FACT 2023.